In May of 2023, we released 2 episodes covering the unsolved murder of Matthew Rattlesnake Grant. That's when we first began working with his aunt, Rhonda Grant-Connelly, who has since gone on to begin the Blackfeet Nation MMIP organization, and who has connected us with families over the past 2 years. Matthew was killed in December of 2016. As the case enters its 9th year, Rhonda has been working with law enforcement to finally hold Matthew's murderers responsible, in the hopes of bringing in any new information, especially from people who might not have been ready to speak in 2016, but who are now willing to help Matthew's family. We are re-airing both his episodes. We're also funding social media ads featuring his FBI poster and the $10,000 reward. These will be targeted to Montana. Rhonda prepared a statement for us to read to our audience, so please pay special attention to the specific special agent mentioned, as he is actively reviewing any tips or leads in Matthew's case. Rhonda wrote about becoming an organizer not just for Matthew, but for other families as well. In some ways, that work began when she applied for a grant back in 2023. Here's what she said, quote, "In 2023, I sought assistance from the Fall Line to obtain a billboard in memory of my nephew, Matthew Grant, who was tragically murdered in 2016. They suggested I apply for a family awareness grant from Season of Justice. I was impressed by the compassion and understanding displayed by Kendall Mills from Season of Justice. As our conversation progressed, I shared my concerns about the numerous families in our reservation community who are seeking justice for their loved ones, and I asked, how can you help me help them? I felt a sense of responsibility and inquired about potential ways to support these families. Kendall suggested providing banners and T-shirts. Ultimately, I decided to utilize the resources to assist these families with banners and T-shirts, rather than pursuing a billboard for my nephew. I extend my gratitude. What helps us is helping others. Since then, Blackfeet MMIP has organized events and conducted searches for loved ones who walked away from treatment centers and group homes, and our efforts have been successful in reuniting 5 loved ones with their families. I've learned in order to gain attention for MMIP, we should support our neighboring reservations and also support other nationalities. We've been working on events like awareness walks and self-defense classes for all ages. Rhonda also discussed the current status of Matthew's case and what she needs from the community. She wrote, quote, "This year we have a new special agent assigned to Matthew's case. Collaboration is needed with the Browning PD in order to collect updated information. I'm confident that we may make progress with Matthew's case in 2025. I spoke with the newly assigned special agent handling Matthew's case, and he informed me that in cases this old, individuals often begin to disclose information. I am aware that there are individuals who possess knowledge regarding Matthew's death. In order to alleviate your conscience, I urge you to come forward and disclose this information to the family or Special Agent Brandon Preet at 801-579-1400. I am not going away. Seeking justice for 8 years has only made me more determined. Matthew was loved. He cared for his younger siblings. He was cheated of watching his only son, baby Matthew, grow into a young man. He never had the privilege of meeting his son. He was born 6 months after Matthew's murder. If you know something, please say something." There is a $10,000 reward available in Matthew's case. As you re-listen to his episodes, please take a moment to share the reward poster available on our social media. As Rhonda said, if you know something, say something. You can follow the work that she's doing with Blackfeet MMIP on Facebook. We've included links in our show notes. This is part 1 of a 2-part series. This series contains discussion of suicide, homicide, crime scenes, and violence. Listener discretion is advised. This is The Fall Line. The name Carolyn DeFord is one that will be familiar to many of our listeners. After all, she's someone that you've heard from on The Fall Line a number of times. We covered her mother Leona LeClaire Kinsey's missing persons case in 2021, and she connected us with the family of Cherokee Finley last year. Carolyn runs the organization Missing and Murdered Native Americans and works as the Trafficking Project Coordinator at the Puyallup Tribe of Indians. This year, Carolyn brought us 2 more cases and connected us with 2 more families. One of those stories is coming to you later this summer when we move back to our seasonal format, the very deep dive shows and intense coverage we brought you in our first several years. The other is the 2016 case of Matthew Rattlesnake Grant. In December of 2016, Matthew was in a state of transition. He turned 21 that October 31st, Halloween. Just a year before, in late November of 2015, he'd moved from Alberta, Canada to Montana. After traveling back and forth between his maternal and paternal families for most of his life, he decided to settle with his late father, Ray Grant's family, on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. His aunt, Rhonda Grant-Connelly, told us that Matthew was excited to begin his new adventure in Montana. He had lots of plans and hopes, but there just wasn't enough time. Here's what his Aunt Rhonda told us.
He was only here a year. He wanted to work. He didn't have his birth certificate, so was trying to get his birth certificate because he was enrolled in the States and also in Canada. And he needed that in order to get a job. And for a short time, he moved to Great Falls with my nephew, Jordan Morgan. And they stayed there for about 4 months, and then they moved back here. And eventually, he moved in with my sister, Fonda. And he just tried to help, family members each and every way he could. He wasn't employed, but we did help him financially, if he needed something with all, he had plenty of aunts and uncles that were willing to help him.
In December of 2016, that was still Matthew's situation. He was living with his aunt, Fonda, not to be confused with Rhonda, and hoping to start work soon. Temperatures had already dropped in Browning, and per KRTV, on December 15th, 2016, there was a winter storm. It was also the last day Matthew Grant's family saw him alive. He left his Aunt Fonda's home that afternoon, promising to return a little later. But Matthew never came home. His family and other community members searched for weeks across the Blackfeet Indian Reservation for any sign of Matthew. And for days, as they later told local media outlets, they had no official outside support in their search. We're told by Matthew's Aunt Rhonda that on the last day of 2016, on New Year's Eve, searchers finally found Matthew in the snow, in an alley, a little north of Browning. He was found only 4 miles or so from home. It was clear, Rhonda says, that he'd been purposely left there. There was an autopsy, but even before that ruling came in, it was obvious. Matthew Grant had been murdered. But why? He'd only been in Montana for a year when he disappeared. Matthew's Aunt Rhonda tells us that the family even has a pretty good idea as to the whys and whos in his case. But now they're waiting for the win, as in win resolution, and justice will come. 6.5 years later, his family in the United States and Canada has yet to see an arrest in his homicide. Despite a $10,000 FBI-sponsored reward and a number of tips, Matthew's case is currently unsolved. Matthew's family has worked to get his story out as part of MMIP initiatives, that's Missing and Murdered Indigenous People, since his death. They often work with the family of Ashley Loring Heavy Runner, whose story you may be familiar with. She was featured on Season 3 of the podcast Up and Vanished. Like Matthew, Ashley also lived on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. She disappeared 7 months after Matthew, in June of 2017. Unlike Matthew, Ashley has never been found. Tenderfoot TV has offered a $50,000 reward in her case. There have also been other recent cases that have hit close to home for Matthew's aunt, Rhonda, and the larger community. Sometimes their names are mentioned in articles featuring Matthew and Ashley when the crisis of MMIP is discussed in Browning and beyond. For instance, in April of 2021, 2 unrelated disappearances were reported just days apart, both involving members of the Blackfeet Nation. 3-year-old Arden Preppian disappeared on April 22nd, and 26-year-old Leo Wagner on the 27th of April. By the summer of 2021, KRTV reported that, quote, the Blackfeet Tribal Business Council had established $10,000 rewards in each case. Both are still missing today, though their cases have taken different investigatory turns. Arden was, quote, last seen with her non-custodial uncle, Hayhax VL, who was watching her at the time of her disappearance. An extensive search followed, but only, quote, footprints leading to a river 50 yards away from where Arden was last seen were discovered, along with the shoes searchers believed to belong to the child. As of the time of this recording, Arden Preppian has still not been located, but her uncle and his partner were charged in relation with her case. Per the local Fox affiliate, her uncle was, quote, charged with negligent endangerment and child endangerment, and his partner with, quote, accountability. These charges were based on alleged failure to, quote, properly supervise a young child in potentially dangerous conditions. According to a Missoulian article from late 2021, Arden's uncle was eventually given, quote, a 9-month suspended sentence that included house arrest for negligent endangerment. At his sentencing, Arden's uncle, quote, accepted responsibility for the loss of Arden. Via reporting on the court case, it was explained that Arden's uncle had been watching her on the evening she disappeared and had taken her to the 2 Medicine River area so that he could practice target shooting. Per the Missoulian, quote, he noticed Arden was missing while he was reloading his gun. After looking around, he saw footprints of hers leading toward the river, starting about 40 to 50 yards from where the water was. He and his girlfriend searched for several hours, and then his girlfriend called law enforcement to report her disappearance. End quote. The uncle's girlfriend's charges were dropped per the plea agreement. According to KURL-8, her mother, Arbana Preppian, passed away in October of 2022 with no definitive answers as to what had happened to her daughter. KURL also reported that the Silent Warrior Coalition, an advocacy group formed in 2016 on the Blackfeet Reservation, had, along with Arden's loved ones, continued efforts to find her to this day. The Missoulian notes that fewer details are available in Leo's case, but that he was, quote, last seen by family and friends near the St. Mary and Bab areas, east of Glacier National Park, on April 27, 2021. An extensive search of the area turned up, quote, clothing and items thought to belong to Wagner at a cabin in the area. Quote, a spokesperson for Blackfeet law enforcement said that the recovered clothing items, quote, indicate Wagner was severely injured. Leo's family and a professional they engaged found further evidence near the cabin, but Leo has so far not been found. In July of 2022, the Bureau of Indian Affairs announced that their missing and murdered unit would be taking the lead in both Arden and Leo's missing persons cases. According to the Independent Record, as of June of 2022, quote, there were 173 active missing persons cases in Montana. Of those, 44 of those cases, or 25%, were listed as Native American. Indigenous people account for 6.7% of the state's population. End quote. And according to an ABC News segment that featured Monty Hills, a tribal law scholar, the cases of missing and murdered on reservations can be made more complicated by the overlapping agencies who may be involved. Mills explained, quote, fundamentally, you have 3 different governments who are responsible for protecting public citizens in Indian country: the federal government, state governments, and tribal governments. And anytime you get 3 governments together to try and do anything, it becomes challenging. Things have certainly been challenging for Matthew Grant's family. From the very first days of his disappearance to today, when his homicide case remains open, his Aunt Rhonda and his other loved ones have continued to pursue answers. And Rhonda feels those answers are readily available. It's just a matter of law enforcement feeling that they have enough evidence to finally move forward. As we told you at the beginning of this episode, Matthew grew up in both Alberta, Canada, and in Montana. Though he spent more time in Canada, his visits to Montana and his father's family were significant. And when he came to the United States in the fall of 2015, he had plans to make Montana his permanent home. Much of Matthew's family lived within the towns and communities within the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. Per the official state website, the reservation stretches over 1.5 million acres and encompasses towns and communities like Browning, Babb, Hart Butte, and more. The 2020 census reported that there were less than 10,000 people living on the Blackfeet Reservation, but per Kaiser Health News, it's very unlikely that that number is accurate. Per Kaiser, a study showed that 6% of the total Native population living on reservations in the United States, or about 1 in 17 people residing on reservations, were missed in the 2020 census count. This isn't the first time an undercount has happened, as the 2010 census had similar issues. This matters for many reasons. It affects how funding is granted, quote, for healthcare, social services, education, and infrastructure. The Blackfeet Reservation population is mentioned specifically in this Kaiser report as being underrepresented in size. So, again, those census numbers don't paint an accurate picture of everyone living there. And, on the other side of the coin, the official counts of the missing and murdered may not be accurate either. It is an epidemic issue that expert Anita Lucchese of the Sovereign Bodies Institute explained to us on the Fall Line in February of 2021.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip. When it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
When he was growing up, Matthew Grant spent his time on both sides of the northern border. As we said, his mother is from Canada, and his father, Ray Grant's family, is from in and around Browning. And according to his Aunt Rhonda, as a child, Matthew loved visiting family in Montana, and sometimes he even got to stay for months. Here on the show, we spend a lot of time taking you across the southern United States. It is territory that we know well, from the rutted back roads to the swamps and marshes, the mountains, the hill country, the red clay, and the rocky shores. Even when we're outside our region to bring you those national cases, from California to Washington to Oregon to Texas and the like, it's usually a state that one of us is familiar with. We've lived there or visited often enough to be able to paint a scene for you. But occasionally, there's a story where we have no reference. The state of Montana is one of those places. It's a region we can watch in videos and see in pictures, but can't quite describe. Looking at photos of northwestern Montana, it's easy to see some of the many things Matthew loved about the area. In the photos I found of Browning, there's a feeling of the sky and the land meeting at the mountains, like the ground and the clouds exist on two flat plains that run out at the foothills of the Rockies. Some of the photos online feature houses and businesses flattened in perspective by cameras that want to capture the beauty of the mountains in the distance. When Matthew came to Montana for good, what he thought was for good, Rhonda said that he wanted to capture a picture, a moment in time too. She described his travel down from Canada to us. You'll hear more about that just a little later, and a specific moment in front of Chief Mountain. In this clip, you'll hear Rhonda mention someone named Jonelle. That's another one of Matthew's aunts.
He was happy. when Janelle and I picked him up, we have, I don't know if you're familiar with this, called Chief Mountain. It's kind of like a sacred mountain, and it's between, just not very far from the border of Canada. And it's kind of like a spiritual thing for everyone. I really don't know the background, or the story about it. But he wanted to take a picture standing in front of it. So I got out and I took a picture of him and Janelle. And when he got out, he stood there and he was just so proud. He looked around, he had a big old smile on his face and grin. And he said, "Oh, America." I couldn't, he was just, I was thinking, he looked at this for a much better life than, than I took. Yeah, I took everything, when we live here in the United States, everything for granted. We don't realize what other people go through, out of the States or other countries.
Rhonda explained to us that Matthew's optimistic outlook was something innate. It was just something that Matthew, the firstborn child to her brother Ray and his then wife Eileen, had been born with. Ray, Matthew's father, was the third youngest in the Grant family, and Rhonda was one of the oldest, which means there was some fair amount of distance between them, considering that there were 12 children in all. So, she got to watch Ray grow up too. Rhonda said that things hadn't been easy for them, even before Ray, one of the youngest children, had been born. In terms of loss, the Grant family has faced a lot.
I was born in Browning, Montana. I am the eldest of 12 children, siblings, and I was raised on Lower to Medicine, which is about 15 miles south of Browning. And my life was not easy. Being the eldest and then having so much tragedy, struck with so much tragedy throughout our lives. And in the year of 1964, I lost two siblings to the flood here to Medicine and Birch Creek because of a dam. I don't know if you're familiar with that. A dam broke, and I lost several family members. I want to say June 8th, 1964. I was 7.
According to a case study we found that covered the historic flood, it wasn't just Two Medicine Dam that failed. Another nearby dam on the reservation, Swift Dam, was destroyed by the water as well. The dams were constructed just a year apart, in 1913 and 1914 respectively, and they both failed on the same day, just 8 hours apart. For those living near Swift Dam, there was no warning before the failure, and 19 people were killed. While there was an alarm raised ahead of the Two Medicine break, it did not help a truck that stalled in the flood's path. Per the case study, 17 people were stranded by the floodwater from the Two Medicine truck stall, and despite rescue efforts, 9 died. Quote, 8 of them were children. Some of the children lost in that historic flood were members of Rhonda's family, and it wouldn't be the last time that the Grant siblings suffered a loss.
At that time, there were 4 of us. It was myself, my brother Robbie. I was 7. He was 5, and my sister Rolanda was 3. I think she just turned 4. And they were the 2 that I lost. And then I had a younger brother, Robin. He was only about 8 months old when that took place. And then later on, when he just turned 21, he was murdered. And then death is kind of prevalent with us because it seems like we just had so many things happen throughout our life. And then in 2005, I had a nephew murdered. He was just 17. And then when this happened to my nephew, it was just so hard to comprehend and to deal with it that it was a total shock and disbelief, because I was thinking, okay, how could this happen again? For the 3rd time, losing a family member to being murdered.
This all happened to the Grants years before Matthew moved permanently to Montana. By that time, 2015, Matthew's father, Ray, who you'll recall was one of Rhonda's youngest siblings, had already passed away. According to public records, he died of natural causes on December 24th, 2010. Ray was just 33 years old at the time of his death. Rhonda told us more about her brother Ray and how excited he'd been when he found out Matthew's mother, Eileen, was pregnant.
My brother Ray, he was very lovable, and he was very artistic. He didn't realize how unique he was in his artwork, and he would actually just give it away. He was an artist. He could carve, he could draw. He carved antlers, and he was also a good carpenter. And I don't think he really realized, what a great asset he was to everyone, because everyone relied on him to do things for them. And he never really asked for anything in return. And she met Matthew's mother. She was from Alberta, Canada, Hobbema, Alberta. That's where she was from. He was very excited. That was his first child. His firstborn was Matthew. And he was his pride and joy. And they also have another daughter. Her name is Cheyenne. She is 2 years younger than Matthew.
Matthew's parents eventually parted ways, and Ray moved back to Montana. Matthew and his sister remained in Canada with their mother, but Rhonda tells us they did not lose connection with the children. She talked about Matthew's visits to Montana as a child and how she got to watch his personality develop.
He was like his father. He was very energetic. He was lovable. He was always talking and laughing, and he liked to visit. He would walk up to my, when he come back to visit in the States, he would stay with my mother. They lived not far from Browning, and her brother lived just not even a quarter of a mile from their home. He'd walk down and visit with him, and he acted like a little man. He liked to visit, and he was loving and caring, and he one of his main concerns were his later on were his siblings. He was the type of person that was never upset. He always looked at things like everything happens for a reason. He didn't really dwell on it, and he tried to, if a person was down, he was good at lifting their spirits, and he looked at life in a way different, from the way I see it, that everything to him was good. He found good in everyone, and he trusted each and every one. He didn't have any, hard feelings, and that was just one mistake. He trusted too much, and I told him that a couple of times. He would meet someone, and he'd go home with them, and I'd tell him, you don't even know him. No, but they seem like a good person. He seems nice, and become buddies. But, that I told him that's something you don't do. You don't do that.
But Rhonda says that's just how Matthew was, especially when it came to his mother and sister and the younger siblings he'd later have. He was caring and sensitive to how they were treated, and it hurt him when they felt pain. Rhonda remembered that as a young boy, Matthew would tell her how upset he'd get when other children would pick on his sister, Cheyenne.
And I said, what do you do, my boy? I said, do you stick up for her? Or do you? And he said, yes, Auntie. He said, I tell him, please leave my sister alone. That's the type of person he was. He didn't believe in violence.
Rhonda told us that, though he had strong ties in Canada, Matthew told her for years that he wanted to come to the United States for good. Things could be difficult in Alberta, and he seemed at his happiest when he spent time in the States. But when he was little, it could just never be a permanent situation.
He kept wanting to move here, and I kept telling him, Matthew, when you become of age, think be best, I didn't want to be responsible for him. But he did come down when he was about 7 years old. He wanted to attend school here, so my mother kept him for about a year. And that day when he, Mom said she gave me some money and she wanted me to bring him shopping for school clothes, and we were in the car and he was sitting there and he was looking at me and he was this big old grin on his face. And I said, what is it, my boy? He said, Auntie, this is the proudest moment of my life. And I said, really? And I said, then why would that be? And he said, I get to go to school and I get to have new clothes. Just little things like that made him happy. And then when we were shopping at JCPenney's and he'd go in and try clothes on and come out and turn around and show me each outfit that he had on. And yeah, he was just proud.
So, as we told you, in the fall of 2015, Matthew decided he was coming permanently to Montana. He called Rhonda to tell her the news. He turned 20 that Halloween, and he could make his own decisions.
And he said, Auntie, I want to come down and stay with you. When he said that, I had this awful feeling. I said, no, my boy. I said, just wait. I said, right now, it was like in November. I said, it's snowy and it's not safe to be on the road. And I said, and you'd have to probably catch a bus to Fort McLeod, and then we have to drive up then to come up from Fort McLeod. And, considering the weather and the roads condition, it just didn't seem safe. And I told him, just wait till the summer, and then maybe Janelle and I, my sister, I said, we can maybe just take a trip to Canada and pick you up. And he said, oh, okay. And out of the blue, he called me about 7 in the evening. It was cold and ugly out, a lot of snow on the ground. And he said, Auntie, I'm on my way down. I said, what? He said, I'm on my way down. I said, Matthew, what did I tell you? I said, the roads are bad and I don't care to drive on if it's not safe. And then just to show you what type of person he was, he called me and he said, Auntie, I met this lady. She's really nice, an elderly lady, and she wants me to come to her home. And I said, what? And he said, yes. He said, she's really nice. And I said, don't you dare get off that bus. So what does he do? He goes home with her brothers and her. I couldn't sleep all that night. I was just so worried. And this lady calls me in early morning, and she told me, she said that she had my nephew. And I said, what's going on? Oh, why do you have my nephew? And why did he go home with you? And I had thousands of questions. And, she said, well, he seemed like a nice boy. I didn't want him left alone, so I told him he could come home with us. And I said, oh, my God. I said, I was just devastated and worried. And she said, well, we were kind of worried about him, too, because we didn't know him.
So he really was very trusting.
He was. I don't know. I don't understand why he was, like that.
But thinking back on it now, all these years later, Rhonda says she does have some guesses. She thinks that some of Matthew's trusting nature wasn't based on what you might assume, naivete. Rather, as the oldest child, she says that he had to reach out to and interact with adults on behalf of his siblings. It made him more comfortable with people and made him extroverted. That meant that he made friends easily, and he attracted people to him too. But sometimes, attention could spark jealousy. That's just not something that Matthew would have focused on, though.
He was the type of person, like, if he seen you doing something, he wouldn't hesitate to jump in and help you. All of my nieces and nephews, they all gravitated to him because he had such an awesome personality. He was always laughing and joking. Never really took life seriously. He was always look at the bright side of things. And that's when that's why, when he disappeared, that's why, I couldn't, believe that he'd actually walk away without one of our family members with him.
So was there a time you had become concerned about him, or was everything going along normally before he disappeared?
Everything was going along normally. Yeah, I wasn't concerned about him. One thing he hated drugs. He did drink, I'll have to admit to that. He would drink, but he hated drugs. And he wasn't really a big concern. Like I said, he was always with one of his cousins, my nephews, or my nieces. I have about 5 nephews and, 5 or 6 nieces. And then his cousins, they all call me auntie, all of his, older cousins. They just all looked out for one another.
Do you know who you first heard that he was missing from? How did the family come to realize it?
At that time, my husband was sick. He was in Kalispell Hospital. He almost died. And I just had a knee replacement a week prior. And I was sitting there, and I was looking on my phone and Facebook, of course. And my sister Fonda, it was like at midnight. She said, "Matthew, where are you?" And I was thinking, this is kind of, what's going on? So anyway, I called her. I said, "Fonda, what's going on?" And she said, "Well, Matthew left this afternoon. He never did return." See, that was out of ordinary because he never stayed away. He always, came back. And she said, "And I don't know where he's at. Where's, like Jordan, and where's AJ and Jeffrey, my other nephews?" And she said, "They're home." And then right then, and I knew something happened. I just knew it. I just had that gut feeling something happened. And so anyway, we start calling everyone. And first thing in the morning, that morning, I called her again. I said, "Fonda, you need to return." And she said, "No." And I said, "Well, you need to put out I'll file a missing report, So that's what she did. And the police, they didn't take it seriously. They just assumed he was out partying. And we told them, no, it's not true.
While Rhonda's husband Gordon was in the hospital and Rhonda was incapacitated from her surgery, she followed along as well as she could from home, staying in constant contact with her relatives. She says that they were unable to secure official help in their search, so they reached out to family and community members for help.
When Matthew was missing, he had a phone. We would call him. I'd call him every time I turn around, and messenger. And I just hate that lonely sound. It's an odd sound. And I knew, no one would pick up, but at least I tried. And I'd Facebook, I'd message him and tell him, please, call us, and whatnot. I don't want anybody to go through what we had to go through. I think it was about 4 days after he was released. My husband was released from the hospital. And I started trying to seek help, asking people to help us search. It was, the weather was like minus 20s, and we had like big old snow drifts, like 4 feet, 5 feet, and it was blowing continuously out. And nobody wanted to venture out in that type of weather, but my nieces and nephews and my brothers and sisters didn't hesitate. They'd go out every day, and I'd tell them I couldn't do nothing, so I'd tell them, go and search every alley, look under cars, look in old sheds, and whatnot. And I called the sheriff department, and they said they couldn't help us because they didn't have no jurisdiction on the reservation. Called the police department, and they said it had to be like 24 hours. And I said, it's been longer than 24 hours. He's been missing for almost a week now. And we need assistance. We need help. So anyway, we started making posters. And by then, we plastered all over Facebook. And by then, people would say, oh, yeah, I'm pretty sure I've seen him here in Kalispell. So my siblings, my nieces and nephews would take that dreadful trip to Kalispell, the roads and so treacherous and whatnot, and hang posters and find this another dead end, Or at Great Falls. They even took a trip to Great Falls because they thought someone seen him there. And it was just, and I told Gordon, he's not there. He said, just leave him alone. He said, it's keeping him busy. And keeping their, that their minds, from thinking the worst. And, I guess they, wanted to believe that he would be found.
Two members of the Silent Warrior Coalition, whom we mentioned near the beginning of the episode, Diana Bird and Belinda Bullshoe, discussed the efforts with KRTV. They said locals were Googling the best and safest ways to organize a search party in harsh winter conditions. Diana Bird told KRTV, quote, "You had the younger ones going door to door, going to some places that people would be scared to go to find Matthew." Meanwhile, Matthew's family went over the hours of the day of his disappearance, his social posts, what he'd said, and with whom he was last seen, because Matthew did not leave his Aunt Fonda's home alone on December 15th. As Rhonda told KRTV in 2019, some people had arrived to pick him up. Rhonda explained, quote, "A young gentleman got out of his vehicle, knocked and asked for Matthew. Matthew jumped up. He was in his room. Fonda asked him where he was going. He said, 'I'll be right back.' That was the last time she saw him." Next time on The Fall Line, more details in Matthew Rattlesnake Grant's case, including the discovery of his homicide and the aftermath, the legislation members of his family have pushed forward, and details that may explain what happened to Matthew and what can be done to bring resolution to his case. If you have any information concerning Matthew Grant's case, please contact the FBI's Salt Lake City field office at 833-345-7872. There is a $10,000 reward in Matthew's case. If you know of a case that should be covered on The Fall Line, there's a link to our case submission form in the show notes. Thank you for listening. The Fall Line is an independently produced show, and we appreciate listener support. It allows us to do research, obtain FOIA, pay our content advisors, and support and donate to the causes we care about. If you try out the products we advertise, please use our sponsor codes. It really helps. And please, take a moment to rate and review our show in your podcast app of choice. If you're interested in pre-ordering my book, which covers a year of my life working on a Jane Doe case and the world of forensic scientists who resolve unidentified persons cases, you can find a link in our show notes. My book is titled Lay Them to Rest, and it's out this October. Pre-ordering this book is a big factor in its success, and I really appreciate it. If you'd like to support The Fall Line and the stories we cover, join us on Patreon. We're raising Patreon funds to continue to pay for the Millbrook Twins billboard and to fund therapy for families who've been on the show. Each and every one of our patrons helps us continue this work, and we're so grateful for your help. On Patreon, you can get early release, ad-free versions of our regular episodes for $5 a month. We also have occasional video live streams and blogs, which all patrons can enjoy, starting at just $1. If you prefer Apple Premium, we've begun that feed as well, so you can have an alternative way to contribute. The Fall Line is written, hosted, and researched by Laurah Norton, with additional research by Brian Waters, Kiana Burgess, and Michaela Morrill. Interviews by Brooke Hargrove. Produced, engineered, and scored by Maura Curry. Content advisement by Brandy C. Williams, Liv Fallon, and Vic Kennedy. And, as always, our most special thanks to Liz Lipka and Sarah Turney.